There's a photograph sitting on my desk right now. I didn't take it. A woman named Harriet Osei, a retired schoolteacher from Accra who was visiting London for the first time in her 71 years, pressed it into my hands outside Windsor Castle 3 weeks ago and said, "You were there. You should have this." I don't know why she thought I deserved it more than she did. I only spoke to the man for 4 minutes. She watched him for 2 hours. But I've been staring at that photograph ever since. Because there's something in his face in the exact moment Harriet captured it that I've been trying to name ever since. It isn't courage. It isn't grief, exactly. It's something quieter than both of those things. Something that sits right at the border between them. It's the face of a man who has already made his decision. And knows what it will cost. Let me take you back to a Thursday morning in early March. Not a remarkable Thursday. Not a day anyone circled on a calendar. The kind of morning London does when it's not quite trying. The flat white sky, the threat of rain that never actually commits, tourists wrapped in too many layers for the temperature, pigeons waddling across cobblestones with the entitled energy of minor royalty themselves. I was there because my editor had sent me to cover what she'd called, with magnificent indifference, a fluff piece. The household cavalry were changing their mounted guard rotation. There was some ceremonial detail about a new regiment taking over the Long Guard at Windsor for the first time in 11 years, and she wanted 800 words and 2 decent photographs by 4 o'clock. I'd been a royal correspondent for going on 14 years. I've covered coronations. I've stood in the rain outside St. George's Chapel for 6 hours once, waiting for a funeral procession that was delayed because of a protocol dispute I still don't fully understand. I have, in my professional life, consumed enough ceremonial British pomp to fill a cathedral and still have leftovers. I was not expecting that Thursday to matter. I want to be clear about that. Because what happened matters more precisely because no one was ready for it, not the tourists, not the other journalists, not the palace staff, and certainly not me. There was no stage. No audience prepared to receive something significant. Just a grey morning and a man on a horse and a decision that had clearly been burning a hole in him for longer than any of us knew. The Long Guard at Windsor is not like the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace. That one, the famous one, has become a kind of theatre in its own right. Tourists queue up 2 hours early. People have folding chairs. There are children on shoulders and phones raised like a forest of anxious periscopes, everyone trying to capture something they're not entirely sure how to feel about. It's spectacle. It's ritual. And it's been performed so many times that it has a kind of worn smoothness to it, like a river stone, beautiful, but all the edges gone. Windsor is different. Windsor still has edges. Maybe it's because the castle itself demands a kind of gravity that Buckingham's Victorian grandeur doesn't quite. Buckingham is impressive the way a very large and expensive hotel is impressive. You feel the money, you feel the intention, you feel slightly underdressed. Windsor is something older and less interested in impressing you. It just sits there, on its hill, the way things sit when they have been somewhere for 900 years and have stopped needing to announce it. The crowd that morning was modest. A German tour group, maybe 30 people, their guide holding up a little orange flag on a stick, speaking into a headset with the practiced patience of someone who has explained the same stone wall 400 times. A cluster of Japanese visitors, impeccably dressed for weather 3 times worse than this, their cameras actual cameras, not phones, which I always find oddly moving. A handful of what I recognized as British tourists, identifiable by the particular English combination of trying to look unbothered while being visibly excited, which manifests as a kind of aggressive casualness, everyone pretending they're just passing through. And Harriet. I noticed Harriet before I noticed almost anything else, which tells you something about Harriet. She was standing near the Henry VIII gate, not where most people stand, not in the prime photograph spot, but slightly off to the side, near one of the older stone sections where the castle wall makes a kind of shallow alcove. She had a camera too. Not a phone. An actual film camera, a Canon AE1 that looked older than some of the journalists I work with, its leather case soft and cracked with decades of use. She was very still. In a crowd full of people oscillating, shifting weight, checking phones, murmuring to each other, adjusting positions, she was absolutely, deliberately still. Watching. The way people watch when they understand that the thing they're looking at is going to mean something later, even if they can't yet say what. I thought, she knows something. I thought it and filed it away and went back to my notebook. The mounted guard came through at exactly 10:13. There were 4 of them, the standard composition for the Long Guard at Windsor, their horses moving in that particular household cavalry rhythm that looks, from a distance, less like trained movement and more like something geological, something tidal. The animals are enormous. People always forget how enormous they are until they're standing near one, and then they tend to take a small involuntary step backward, the body reacting before the brain can perform its usual reassurances. I'd seen this rotation dozens of times. I had my notebook ready. My photographer, a young man named Declan who was doing his 6th royal assignment and still found all of it genuinely thrilling, bless him, was positioned well. We were set up. Professional. Waiting to collect our 800 words and 2 decent photographs and be home before the committed rain finally arrived. 3 of the 4 writers were what I expected. The 4th was not. He was writing rear left, not a prominent position, not where you'd place someone you were trying to showcase. He was young, though with the ceremonial helmet and the polished breastplate it's always difficult to be precise about age. His horse was a dark bay, not the striking black of the lead horses, but a deep, serious brown that caught the flat morning light in a way that made you look twice. But it wasn't the horse. It was him. I want to be careful here, because I've written enough about public figures and public moments to know how easy it is to project, to look at someone's face and paste a narrative onto it that was never there. But I've also spent 14 years watching people in formal situations trying to suppress what they're actually feeling, and I have developed, if nothing else, a working eye for the gap between the face someone is maintaining and the one that keeps almost surfacing underneath. He was maintaining his face. Just barely. There was something happening in his jaw. Not a tremor, nothing so obvious. Something more like the stillness of a jaw that has been consciously, deliberately locked, the same way you'd lock a door you were afraid might open on its own. His eyes were forward, as protocol required. His posture was immaculate. Everything above the surface was exactly what it was supposed to be. But there was a quality to his stillness that was different from the other's stillness. The other 3 had the easy, practiced stillness of men who had done this long enough that it had become a kind of rest, the body knowing what to do, the mind somewhere else, warm. His stillness was work. You could feel the effort of it from 20 feet away, the way you can sometimes feel the effort in music when a singer is holding a note at the very top of their range and you find yourself holding your breath without meaning to, because some part of you understands what holding costs. Declan lowered his camera. "That bloke all right?" he murmured. "Keep shooting," I said. But I was watching. The rotation reached its position. The ceremonial exchange began in the slow, precise choreography of relief and assumption of duty that has been performed the same way for longer than anyone currently living can remember. The German tour guide's voice floated toward me, patient and explanatory. The tradition dates to the reign of Charles II, when one of the Japanese visitors raised their actual camera. Harriet hadn't moved. The exchange proceeded normally. Everything was in order. I had started making notes about the regiment, about the 11-year gap, about the weather, those small journalistic filler details that pad the space between what actually happened and the word count you've been assigned. And then, the senior officer, the man leading the incoming guard detail, brought his horse to the standard position and spoke. The words were inaudible to me at that distance, swallowed by wind and the particular acoustic indifference of stone courtyards. Protocol words. Formal words. Words that have been said in that same spot, in that same order, as ritual requires. The 3 other writers responded as they were supposed to respond. The 4th rear left, the bay horse, the locked jaw, did not. He responded differently. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Not in any way that announced itself as defiance or spectacle or crisis. He simply, and I'm choosing this word carefully, deviated. One small, precise deviation from the expected response. A different word, or a different cadence, or a different weight given to the response. I couldn't hear it from where I stood, but I could see it land. I could see the senior officer's shoulders change. I could see the man to the right of rear left flick his eyes sideways for a fraction of a second, then return them forward, the trained discipline snatching the reaction back before it fully formed. The German tour guide's voice continued explaining Charles II. The Japanese visitor's camera clicked. Harriet's film camera made its own, quieter click. And I wrote in my notebook, in letters larger than my usual handwriting because sometimes your hand knows something your brain is still catching up to, something just happened. What came next did not come immediately. This is important. Because in retrospect, and I've thought about this a great deal in the 3 weeks since, the most extraordinary thing about what followed was not the thing itself. It was the waiting. The space between the deviation and its consequence. The guard rotation continued. Horses moved. The ceremony completed itself with the pitiless momentum of long tradition, because tradition does not pause for individual human crisis. It has no mechanism for pausing. It simply continues, and the person inside it either continues with it or they don't. He continued with it. For another 40 minutes, he continued. Position maintained. Jaw locked. Eyes forward. The bay horse standing patient and enormous and entirely unbothered, because horses are sensibly indifferent to the institutional crises of the humans on their backs. The tourists cycled through. The German group photographed. The Japanese visitors departed in an orderly and gracious cluster. New tourists arrived, Americans, I thought, from the confident width of their stances and the way they talked to each other as though the volume of conversation was itself a form of information sharing. I stayed. Declan stayed because I stayed, though he was eyeing the sky with increasing concern about his equipment. Harriet stayed. She never once checked her phone. She never shifted to a better angle. She just stood in her alcove with her old Canon AE1 and watched, with the quality of attention that belongs to people who have lived long enough to recognize the specific weight of a moment that will not come again. At some point, I couldn't tell you exactly when, she looked at me. Just for a moment. Her eyes were very dark and very calm and entirely certain. She gave me the smallest possible nod. Like she was confirming something. Like she wanted a witness. The duty rotation officially concluded at 11:47. The guards were led through the inner gate. The ceremony was done. The tourists who remained dispersed with the slightly deflated energy of people who attended a thing and are now unsure if the thing was what they came for. I was closing my notebook, running through the math of 800 words and whether I'd seen enough for them, when I heard a voice. Not loud. The opposite of loud. The kind of voice that carries precisely because it is not competing with anything. Captain. A moment, please. I looked up. The rear left rider, the bay horse, the locked jaw, the deviation, had dismounted. He was standing near the gate, his helmet under his arm, and he was speaking to the senior officer. The senior officer had turned to face him. His posture had gone very still in the way that senior officers' postures go still when they understand that what is about to happen is going to require them to be very, very careful about what they do with their face. I was too far away to hear the words. But I could see the man's face now, fully, for the first time. And that's when I understood what Harriet had been photographing. It wasn't the ceremony. It wasn't the pageantry. It wasn't the history-made material in stone and horse and polished brass. She had been photographing the moment before a man breaks something he loves. The look on his face was the look of someone who has been holding a decision for a very long time, weeks, maybe. Months, maybe. The kind of decision that doesn't get lighter for being carried. The kind that you set down 100 times in your mind and pick back up 100 times, testing its weight, hoping each time that it will feel different, that you will find some configuration of the facts that changes the answer. And then, you run out of ways to test it. And, you know. And, you carry it one last time. And, you set it down. For good. His name was Thomas Aldrin. I found that out later, the way journalists find things out, not cleanly, not all at once, but, in pieces, the way you assemble a picture from fragments that were never meant to be assembled. A name from a regimental contact who owed me a favor. A middle name that his mother used and no one in the regiment did. A service record that told me the facts without explaining any of them, because service records are congenitally incapable of explaining things. Thomas. 29 years old. 7 years in the Household Cavalry. 2 tours before that, not something you often see in that regiment, not anymore, the cavalry having evolved so far from its original purpose that the horses are largely ceremonial and the men who ride them often come from what politely gets called the traditional pipeline: good school, good family, the right handshake at the right moment. Thomas did not come from the right handshake. He came from Ely. Small city, Cambridgeshire, the kind of place that produces people who work hard because there is no alternative being presented to them. His father drove freight. His mother was a nurse, community health, the invisible kind of nursing that never makes the news because it happens in living rooms and hallways and the backs of cars, one quiet crisis at a time. He had a younger sister who was, according to the regimental contact who owed me a favor, completely brilliant and the one who should have gotten all the glory, but you know how it goes. I do know how it goes. Thomas had gotten in on merit. Full stop. He'd earned his place in that regiment through a combination of equestrian talent, physical conditioning, and a quality that several people described to me, independently, with the same slight surprise, as decency. Like it was slightly unexpected. Like decency wasn't something you planned for in your evaluations but kept finding in him anyway, the way you find a coin in an old coat pocket. 7 years. That's not nothing. That's 7 years of early mornings and horse care and ceremonial preparation and the specific discipline of learning to be still, actually, genuinely still, in the presence of enormous crowds and cameras and noise and the particular performance pressure of representing something that belongs to everyone and to no one and somehow to you. 7 years of that. And then, one Thursday morning in March, he deviated. I need to tell you what I learned about the 6 weeks before that Thursday. Because it didn't begin on Thursday. Things like this never begin where they appear to begin. They begin in the dark, in private, in the kind of conversations that don't get recorded anywhere, not in service records, not in institutional memory, because they happen between a man and his own conscience, and consciences don't take minutes. What I know for certain, verified through 3 separate sources, 6 weeks before the Thursday, Thomas Aldrin had submitted a formal request through the proper channels of the regiment. The request was not about pay, not about posting, not about any of the standard institutional frictions that generate formal requests. The request was about a specific ceremonial protocol, one element of the Long Guard's formal acknowledgement, a verbal component of the duty exchange that Thomas believed was being executed incorrectly. Not dangerously. Not harmfully. Incorrectly, in a way that was historically verifiable and, which Thomas had, according to one source who'd seen the original document, supported with what she described as an almost obsessively thorough appendix, dates, citations, the lot. You could feel how long he'd been sitting on it. The response from the chain of command had been, to summarize delicately, no. Not wrong, exactly. Just, no. This is how it's done. This is how it has been done. This is how it will continue to be done. The machinery of tradition is not adjusted by individual observation, however thorough the appendix. Thomas had accepted that. He'd gone back to his duties. He'd continued his mornings and his horses and his stillness. He'd been, by all accounts, impeccably professional in the weeks that followed. But the request had gone in. Which meant someone had thought about it enough to write it down. And, when you've thought about something enough to write it down, and the writing has been rejected without, according to Thomas's account later, any engagement with the substance of it, not a single reference to anything I'd actually put in the document, something changes. Not immediately. The way a hairline crack in old stone changes. The wall still stands. Nothing is visibly different. But the structural integrity has been quietly, fundamentally altered. And the next significant load applied to that wall will find the crack and work through it. The Thursday in March was a significant load. Because on the Thursday in March, the Long Guard duty exchange was happening for the first time in 11 years under this regiment, and the specific verbal component Thomas had flagged, the one he believed was being done incorrectly, was going to be performed. Formally. Publicly. Before witnesses. Before history, in the small, unnoticed way that all ceremonial acts participate in history, not the history that gets written down in textbooks, but the living history of practice, of habit, of the accumulated doing of a thing that becomes the thing itself over enough time. He had one chance to flag it through action. One moment. Rear left. The bay horse. The locked jaw. He took it. What I didn't know, what none of us standing in that courtyard knew, was that taking it had cost him something he'd already spent considerable time measuring. I know this because Thomas Aldrin, 3 days after the Thursday, agreed to speak to me. I don't know why. He'd refused 2 other journalists, I learned later. He'd been advised by people whose advice he generally respected to say nothing, go quiet, let the institution manage the narrative, which institutions are very good at when given the space to do so. He called me on a Saturday evening. My phone showed a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't pick up. "You were there," he said, when I answered. "Not a question. On Thursday. I saw you." "I was there," I said. A pause. Long enough that I checked the line was still connected. "I want to be accurate about it," he said. "I've been thinking about it and I want someone to be accurate about it." "Is that something you do? Be accurate?" I told him I tried. Another pause. Then, "All right. I'll tell you what it was." We met in a pub in Windsor, which felt appropriate and also slightly absurd, the way so many British things manage to feel simultaneously. It was a Sunday afternoon, quiet in the way English pubs are quiet in the late afternoon before the evening crowd arrives, a few older men with pints, a couple sharing a roast, the particular companionable silence of a place that has been a place for a very long time. Thomas was already there when I arrived. Sitting at a corner table, not conspicuously, not in a way that announced I am sitting with my back to the wall because I am a man currently navigating an institutional consequence, but in the instinctive way of people who have been trained to be aware of their surroundings. He was in civilian clothes. Dark jeans, a navy jumper, boots that had been resoled recently enough to still look considered. Without the helmet and the breastplate and the ceremony, he looked younger than he had on Thursday, and, also, this is the word that kept coming back to me, lighter. Not happy. Not relieved, exactly. But, lighter. The way people look after they've set something down. He ordered tea. I ordered the same. He waited until it arrived before he started talking, which I took as a characteristic thing, a man who didn't begin before he was ready. "I want to start," he said, "by saying that this isn't about being right." He said it the way people say things they've rehearsed, which didn't make it less true, just meant he'd thought about how to say it accurately. "I know how it looks. One person versus a tradition that's been running for 300 years. It looks like ego. I've been told it looks like ego. I want to be on record saying I know how it looks, and I spent a long time making sure it wasn't that." I asked him to tell me what it was, then. He wrapped both hands around his mug, that particular English gesture, comforting and grounding, the warmth of the ceramic doing work that the conversation itself couldn't quite do yet. 7 years, he said. 7 years of doing this thing. This specific thing. This specific verbal form and the duty exchange. And I do it right, because that's the job, and the job is something I take seriously in a way I can't always explain to people who haven't done it. There's a reason the protocol exists. There's a reason the form is what it is. It isn't decoration. It's living language. It means something. Every part of it means something. He paused. Looked at his tea. And then I went digging. Not because something felt wrong, just because I wanted to understand it better. I wanted to understand what I was doing and why. And I found that the current verbal form of the exchange acknowledgement, the specific phrase we use, the specific cadence, it isn't the original. It's a modification. Made in 1987, by a subcommittee that was trying to streamline several procedures. And the original, the one that goes back to the regiment's founding, the one that carries the actual meaning that the ceremony is supposed to carry, it's been sitting in the archive. Not used. Because of a 1987 subcommittee. He said 1987 subcommittee the way you'd say the name of a disease. Quiet and certain and carrying considerable weight. So I went through channels, he continued. Proper channels. Put together everything I had. Asked for a review. And was told politely, professionally, that the current form was established and there was no basis for revision. I asked him what he did with that. I sat with it, he said simply. For 6 weeks, I sat with it. I thought, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's context I don't have. Maybe the 1987 subcommittee had reasons I don't have access to. I went back through everything. And I kept coming to the same place. He met my eyes directly. His were gray, not an interesting gray, not a literary gray, just the color of ordinary stone in ordinary light, and somehow that made them more straightforward to look at than eyes that were trying to be something. I wasn't wrong, he said. And, on Thursday, for the first time in 11 years, we were going to perform this form in front of witnesses as part of a formal rotation handover. Which means it goes into the record. The record that becomes the thing the next 7 years of soldiers train from. And, I thought, if I let that happen, I have participated in the error becoming permanent. Not by accident. By choice. I asked the question I'd been building toward since Saturday evening. You knew what it would cost you. Not a question. A statement I wanted him to confirm or correct. He didn't answer immediately. He turned his mug in his hands, not anxiously, just thinking. The pub's ambient noise filled the space between us. Someone at the bar laughed at something. The couple sharing the roast asked for more gravy. I had a conversation with my CO, he said finally, the week before. Not about this specifically. About the institution. How it works. What it prioritizes. And, he said something that stuck. He said, the institution can absorb anything except the appearance of disorder. Because the institution is order. It's what it does and what it is. An exception to order, even a correct exception, looks the same from the outside as a wrong one. He paused. And I understood what he meant. I understood it and I agreed with it, actually. He's not wrong. Institutions need coherence to function. And one person going rogue, even for the right reason, introduces incoherence. Creates a precedent that can be used to justify other deviations that aren't for the right reason. I understood all of that. Another pause. And then, I thought, but if the institution's primary function is the preservation of its own order, then, the thing the institution is supposed to be preserving, the actual tradition, the actual meaning, the original form, becomes secondary. And, then, what are we actually doing? What is all of this actually for? He looked at the table. Then, back at me. That's not a rhetorical question. I genuinely needed to answer it. And, the answer I kept coming back to was, the ceremony exists to carry something real. It exists to be a living connection to something. If the form being preserved is not the original form, then, we are not preserving the connection. We are preserving the appearance of the connection. And, those are very different things. Outside, the light was beginning to go gray and early. March light, indecisive. Harriet's photograph was in my bag. She'd given it to me just before I left Windsor that Thursday, pressing it forward with both hands like something she wanted passed on. I took it out and put it on the table. He looked at it for a long time. In the photograph, he is mid-deviation. The moment itself, the exact syllable, maybe, where the form diverged from what was expected. His jaw is still locked. His eyes are still forward. Every trained inch of him is still doing what it's supposed to do. But, his face. His face is doing something that all the training in the world could not quite contain. It is the face of a man paying a price he has already calculated, and finding the calculation correct, and paying it anyway. I knew, he said quietly. I knew what it would cost. He pushed the photograph back to me. That's why I needed someone to be accurate about it. The institution responded the way institutions respond. Efficiently. quietly. With the particular speed that large bureaucratic bodies achieve when motivated by the need to contain something before it becomes a shape that can't be contained. Within 48 hours of the Thursday before Thomas and I had our Sunday conversation, before Harriet's photograph had found its way into my bag, the internal process had already begun. Not punitive, exactly. Nothing so clean. More like the institution had turned to face the anomaly and applied its full, considerable weight to the question of what to do with it. Thomas was stood down from mounted duty pending a review. The language of the notice, which I eventually obtained through a source who was very clear that I was not to say how I'd obtained it, was careful the way institutional language is always careful, hedged, procedural, neither accusatory nor exculpatory, leaving every door open while effectively closing all of them. A period of administrative review. An assessment of suitability for continued ceremonial duties. The kind of language that is designed to be read is temporary but means something else entirely in practice. His regimental colleagues were not asked to comment. They were asked not to comment, which is a different thing dressed in the same clothes. 3 journalists other than me reached Thomas in the days following. He declined each of them. He'd called me, he told me later, because of something I'd written the previous year, a piece about a Gurkha veteran, long service, inadequate recognition, a campaign by his family that finally got somewhere, and something in the way I'd handled it had suggested to Thomas that I might be the kind of writer who would sit with something complicated and not try to make it simpler than it was. I'm not sure I deserved that assessment. But I tried to earn it. What happened to Thomas Aldrin's career is a matter of institutional record that I am not in a position to detail fully, partly for legal reasons and partly because the process was, at the time of writing, still ongoing. What I can tell you, what he told me he wanted said accurately, is what he did not do. He did not apologize. Not because he was defiant, or because he wanted to position himself as a martyr to his cause, or because he was young enough to be foolish about institutional power. He was not any of those things. He understood, with a clarity that was slightly uncomfortable to be around, exactly what he was dealing with and exactly what apologizing would mean. An apology implies the act was wrong, he told me. And I can't say it was wrong. I'd need to believe it was wrong to say it. And I've gone over it, I've been over it 100 times since Thursday, lying awake at 3 in the morning going over it, and I keep coming back to the same place. The act was necessary. The cost of the act was real. But those are 2 separate questions, and I won't conflate them to make either question easier to answer. There it is again. That particular quality of mind. The ability to hold 2 contradictory true things, this was necessary, this cost me something real, without needing them to resolve into one simpler true thing. Most people can't do that. Most people need the story to land somewhere, need the sacrifice to be worth it or not worth it, need the hero to be vindicated or humbled or transformed. We need the grammar of narrative because the grammar of narrative tells us what things mean. Thomas did not seem to need the grammar of narrative. He seemed to have made peace with something more difficult, the possibility that a thing could be right and costly and unresolved all at once, and that peace was not contingent on any of those 3 states changing. I found this genuinely difficult to be in the presence of. It made me aware of all the places where I use resolution as a coping mechanism, where I need to know how things end before I can decide what to feel about them. He was comfortable not knowing how it ended. At least, he presented as comfortable. That might be the most I can say with honesty. I went back to Windsor 2 weeks after the Thursday. Not on assignment. My editor, when I told her I was returning, gave me the look she reserves for stories she suspects are going to become more complicated than their original word count. 800 words, she reminded me. I sent you for 800 words. I know. The piece I eventually submitted was 4,000, and she ran it anyway, which is why I've worked for her for 14 years. I went back because I needed to see the courtyard again. Not with something happening in it, without. Just the stone and the light and the specific quality of a place that has been the site of something significant and returned to its ordinary self. It was quieter than the Thursday. A weekday, mid-afternoon, the light already tilting toward evening though it was barely 3 o'clock, the way March light does in England, it apologizes for itself early. A handful of tourists, the scattered and individual kind rather than the group kind, each of them finding their own relationship with the castle, which I've always thought was more honest. The groups perform their response to each other. The individuals just have it. I stood near the Henry VIII gate, where Harriet had stood. I tried to see what she'd seen. The courtyard without ceremony is still a courtyard that holds the memory of ceremony, 900 years of accumulated occasion, layered into the stone the way music gets layered into a good concert hall. The resonance of all the sound that has been made there still present if you know how to listen for it. State visits. Funerals. The changing of guards through every reign and crisis and war and quiet ordinary year that didn't know it was making history. All of it still there, in the specific way that past things are still there, not gone, just no longer happening. A man on one Thursday morning had introduced into that stone a tiny deviation. One syllable different. One verbal form restored to its original shape. The institution had already begun the work of smoothing over it. Administrative review. The careful language. The stood-down duty. Already the machinery of continuity was reasserting itself, filling in the space that Thomas's deviation had briefly made. By next year, it might be as if the Thursday had not occurred at all. Institutionally. Officially. But the thing had happened. And things that happen cannot unhappen, even when institutions do their most determined work on the record. Someone was always there. Someone always sees. Someone always keeps the photograph. Harriet Osei called me the week my piece ran. She'd read it online. She told me her daughter had found it and printed it out for her, which I found touching in a way that was difficult to explain without sounding patronizing, so I just let it be touching. "You got it right," she said. Her English was very precise, with a formal quality that suggested it was a language she'd learned with care rather than absorbed by accident. "I've been thinking about whether you would, and you did." I asked her why she'd been at Windsor that Thursday. "My husband," she said. "He died last year. He always wanted to come to Windsor. He grew up reading about it, British history, colonial curriculum, you know the story. He used to say, 'I know more about that castle than most people who can see it from their window.' And he always meant to come. And then, he ran out of time." A pause. The specific weight of it. "So I came for him. I thought, I'll go and I'll see it properly. I'll pay attention the way he would have paid attention." He was a man who noticed things. He would have noticed something happening. He would have wanted to know what it meant. She paused again. "And then, something happened. And I noticed it. And I thought, he would have liked this. A man in a ceremony standing up for something real. He would have said, 'That's what integrity looks like when it's inconvenient. When it's convenient, it's just common sense.'" I wrote that down. I've been writing things down my whole professional life, and that sentence, "when it's convenient, it's just common sense," is one I've returned to more than once in the 3 weeks since. "He would have liked that young man," Harriet said. "I think he's paying for it," I said. Honestly. Because she'd earned honesty. "Yes," she said. "That's how you know it was real." The last time I spoke to Thomas was by phone, a week before this piece ran. I'd called to give him the opportunity to read the relevant sections, to correct any factual errors, to object to anything I'd gotten wrong. This is standard practice, though in this case it felt more like an obligation I was genuinely glad to fulfill. He had a few small corrections. Dates, mostly. One misremembered detail about his service record that he wanted set straight. He was precise and undemanding about it, correcting, not controlling. At the end, after we'd gone through everything, he said, "Can I ask you something?" I told him yes. The woman with the old camera. On Thursday. "Did you talk to her?" "Yes," I said. "I saw her," he said. "I saw her before the rotation even started. I don't know why I looked at her specifically. She was just standing there. Not doing what everyone else was doing. Not performing the experience, if you know what I mean. Just present." I told him what Harriet had told me. About her husband. About coming for him. About the colonial history curriculum and the man who knew more about Windsor than people who could see it from their windows. Thomas was quiet for a long time. He started. Stopped. That means something. That she was there. She gave me a photograph, I said. I know. You described it in the piece. I can send you a copy, if you want one. Another pause. Yes, he said. I'd like that. I want to remember what my face looked like when I still thought I might not actually do it. Did you really think you might not? The longest pause of all. Long enough that I could hear the ambient sound of wherever he was, something quiet, interior, the particular acoustic quality of a small room. No, he said finally. I think I always knew. I think once you've seen it clearly, once you've run out of ways to argue yourself into the comfortable position, you know. I knew before I mounted that morning. I knew when I put my helmet on. I was just doing the last thing a person does when they know. Running the knowing through again. Making sure. I asked him if he was sure. Of the act? Yes. Of everything else? A breath. I have no idea. Thomas Aldrin's case is, at this point, pending. The institution will do what institutions do. It will weigh the individual against the collective, the exception against the precedent, the correct thing against the convenient thing, and it will make a determination that reflects which of those weights matters more to it in this particular moment. That determination may be fair. It may not be. Both outcomes are possible, and I am not in the business of predicting institutional behavior because institutions, like horses, are large and patient and occasionally completely unpredictable regardless of their training. What I can tell you is what I know. I know that on a Thursday morning in March, a man named Thomas Aldrin mounted a bay horse and rode into a stone courtyard and performed a 7-year-old ceremony in front of a handful of tourists and a retired schoolteacher from Accra who was carrying her late husband's attention with her into everything she saw. I know that he introduced one small, precise, historically verifiable deviation into that ceremony. I know that he had tried every legitimate alternative. I know he had sat with the decision for 6 weeks and run out of ways to argue himself away from it. I know he understood what it would cost him, not abstractly but concretely, his posting, his ceremonial duty, possibly his career in the regiment he had served for 7 years through 2 tours and 1,000 cold mornings with horses. I know he made the choice anyway. And I know because Harriet was there, because her camera was there, because the Canon AE1 that her husband had given her as a wedding gift still had film in it, that there is a photograph of the moment before the locked jaw fully locked. Of the face of a man paying a price he calculated clearly, correctly, and without self-pity. Of a person choosing the real thing over the preserved appearance of the real thing, even knowing, especially knowing, what preserving appearances is actually for. The photograph is on my desk. Harriet said, "You were there. You should have this." I don't know that I deserved it. I only spoke to him for 4 minutes, that Sunday afternoon. I ordered tea and I listened and I tried to be accurate. But maybe that's what she meant. Maybe deserving it wasn't the criterion. Maybe the criterion was, someone needs to keep it. Someone needs to know what his face looked like. Someone needs to hold the image of what it looks like when a person does the inconvenient true thing, not heroically, not grandly, not in a way that photographs well or reads well or resolves cleanly into the kind of story we know what to do with. Just a man on a horse on a gray Thursday morning. Jaw locked. Eyes forward. Paying a price he already counted. And finding it correct. His mother is a nurse in Ely. The invisible kind. The kind that happens in living rooms and hallways and the backs of cars, one quiet crisis at a time. I think about that. I think she probably raised him knowing something about what it means to do necessary work that no one will record. Work that doesn't go into the history books or the regimental records or the institutional memory. Work that happens because it must happen, and the only witness is the person doing it. And I think about what Harriet's husband said, the way Harriet said it to me, the way I've been turning it over ever since. When it's convenient, it's just common sense. The photograph is on my desk. The wall laughed. No, wait. That was a different story. This one ends quietly. The way Thursday mornings in March end. The rain finally, committing, a little later than promised. Stone wet and darkened. The courtyard empty. And, in the archive, somewhere, if anyone thought to look, the original form. Sitting there. Not used for decades. Waiting with the patience of things that know themselves to be correct and have simply run out of people willing to say so. For one syllable, on one Thursday, someone said so. That's enough. That will have to be enough.